All right, we are live. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Ehrman. I'm the director of the Virginia Procurement Technical Assistance Program. We provide two major things for government contractors, and that is one-on-one counseling as well as training. And this webinar on security and facility clearances is one of the new training webinars that we're rolling out as our clients are asking for new topics. We find experts in their fields to spend an hour or two with us for providing great information and answering all your questions. Please, as we go through today, if you have any questions, type them in the chat box. I'm keeping track of them so that we can answer them later. If you have any questions about today, about the PTAP program, about anything else we talk about, send me an email at aurman@gmu.edu. You should have received an email from me earlier with login instructions. You could reply to that as well. So for today's topic, we have security and facility clearances presented by two excellent government contracting experts. We have Jennifer Schauf with JS & Associates, and we have Tony, I don't want to butcher your name.
Anaketh.
Anaketh, thank you. I would have gotten that wrong. He's an attorney and partner with Williams Mullen, and they have some great insight on this process, which is kind of murky and mysterious to many government contractors. So with that, I will let the experts take over. Thank you very much for being with us today, Jennifer and Tony.
Great. Thanks, Anna, for having Tony and myself, and thanks to all the attendees who have taken time out of their day to join us. The presentation today is being recorded, so we will send out a link at the end of the presentation so that you can go back and listen to anything that you may have missed or look at our slides. So as Anna mentioned, Tony is an attorney with Williams Mullen. I have a boutique consulting firm in Washington, D.C. We primarily help government contractors with GSA schedules, proposal writing, federal sales and business development, and we also host events for government contractors. So more information can be found on our website. And I will now pass the results over to Tony, and he will give you a little bit of background about himself, his firm, and he will get into the presentation. Tony, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for taking up part of your afternoon visiting with us. To give you some context, my name is Tony Anaketh. I'm the head of the Government Contracts Industry Service Group at Williams Mullen, and I work with a fair number of small and medium-sized companies and some larger companies on security clearance issues that they encounter in the context of doing business with the government or seeking to do business with the government. Our group is comprised of some core government contracts attorneys, and we're assisted by a number of other people in the firm with different specialties who've learned enough about government contracts that they can jump into a matter pretty quickly. Williams Mullen has 10 offices, mostly on the East Coast. We're a business law firm that gets to know our clients pretty well on the theory that if an issue arises, we like to be able to answer it quickly. And with that brief introduction, let's turn the slide and then on to the next page. And this is going to be the agenda that we're going to follow today. This is really a top-level basic course on facility clearances and security clearances. I will say, although it's probably against my interest, it's a field that if you're a domestic company, the rules are sufficiently set out in the public arena that one could go through the process oneself, although the assistant of a consultant or an attorney who does it fairly frequently can certainly expedite the process a bit and help to solve questions when they arise. If you are associated with or a foreign company the process is a bit more complicated, and outside assistance probably would help. The one person that you are going to need, if you're a small company, it might be yourself. As you grow a little bit, it might be somebody else, is somebody called an FSO, or a facility security officer. That is a person who is going to take some courses and know the facility security rules well, because the consequences of messing up in this area are significant, and one needs to stay current. The topics we're going to hit on today are really what a facility clearance is, and distinguish it from a personal security clearance, who needs an FCL, and perhaps more importantly, who's entitled to get one. We'll go through the process of obtaining a facility clearance, and mostly for a domestic company, but we will also touch on those that have foreign ownership, control, or influence. And that's really any company that has any involvement by someone who's overseas or might have an overseas presence. The importance of ongoing compliance, and then some related issues to deal with export controls, and what happens if you're a foreign entity and want to acquire a company in the United States. We'll then have a period of time for Q&A, which I understand you can type in on the screen on your computer, and we'll do our best to answer them. Next page, please. So, the need for security clearances and the like has always existed. It pertains to that information that the United States government considers to be pertinent to national security and is not appropriate for public dissemination. I will tell you that the government views things that are classified in funny ways. When you hear of things that are marked confidential, secret, or top secret, you're generally in the area of classified information, although we often think of a document, when you think of Edward Snowden and the like, or the older folks, Daniel Ellsberg, documents stamped secret or top secret. The government has a different view. Often, if you take a collection of otherwise unclassified information and put them together, that in fact may make it classified. Since 9/11, with the focus on national security, there has been a vast increase in the amount of information that is deemed necessary for security clearances. We know from the papers that the government is probably a little over heavy-handed in terms of what it deems classified material. And then there's the challenge of, once it's classified, seeking to have it declassified. A security clearance, although there are, I think, 4 to 5 or 6 million people who have security clearances, it's a highly valued commodity, both as a personal asset and as a company asset. They are not easily given out, despite the many who have them, and they are something that can be used, particularly in Washington and the surrounding area, to come up with a job on the dark side of the screen. They're easily lost if one is careless, such that compliance is important. I do want to draw a distinction between a facility clearance versus a personal security clearance. An individual needs a security clearance to have access to classified information, and one goes through a process by filling out a fairly extensive form and going either through a basic national background check for the secret level or a full field investigation for a top secret level, and then there are added bells and whistles if one, in addition, wants to gain access to something called a secure compartmented information program, which is really a little pod where only a limited number of people are involved. And then over that, there are other more onerous security clearances for special access programs. A facility clearance is what the company gets. And the relationship between them is somebody who holds a personal security clearance needs to be sponsored, or the clearance held by a company or the government. And one of the challenges occur is if one is awarded a contract that requires access to classified information and one doesn't have a facility clearance, then one has to go out for its staff that has security clearance and second them or attach them to another company so that they can perform the work. Let's go on to the next page, please. So let's talk a little bit about what a facility clearance is. The definition is it's an administrative determination from the national security standpoint that the facility, which can be a company or a government agency, is eligible for access to classified information at or below the clearance being granted. And then a description of a facility is really, it's a building or a location. It's important to note that facility clearances are granted in two types. There is a hold clearance, which means that you are going to hold materials at your facility, and the requirements for that are more substantial than for those that are granted a facility clearance without a hold, i.e. if you were to get a contract or be involved in a project where you were going to do all of your work at a government facility or at another contractor's site, you can get a facility clearance without a hold requirement. If your job requires you to bring documents or materials back to your offices, then you have to go through additional steps of having your office approved for the holding of documents. And as you can imagine, as you go from secret to top secret to other, the burdens of that increase considerably. I've already mentioned the three levels of confidential is really a document that you're not supposed to leave out on your desk. A secret document is something that's supposed to be locked up at night in a GSA-approved safe, and a top secret document is something that requires a number of safeguards both in the storage and in the transportation between facilities. The Holy Grail when you get approved for a facility clearance is that you get to sign a Department of Defense security agreement. When you're in the DOD, there are other agency agreements that you may sign at the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Energy that vary somewhat, but all basically set out the terms that you agree to abide by the law, make sure that the materials are protected, and to report any violations to the government. Next slide, please. So often people say, how do I go about getting an FCL? It would improve my business. As a matter of fact, some of you may be wondering how to do that. And the fact is that one cannot just go get a facility clearance or a personal security clearance for that matter. Security clearances are only handed out to those who, quote, have a need to know. So you can't go ask a government agency for it. You can't go to a congressman and ask for it. You have to have a need to know. That can occur if you're bidding on a project, or you're a contractor, or you're brought in as a subcontractor, or you go to work for the government. The bid or the potential contract needs to require access to classified information, and that can come in several forms. One can have what's called a white world or a public contract in which you're going to have to do some work on a Navy base. And because you're on a Navy base that has the fleet, say, down in Norfolk, you may have access or come into contact with classified information. In that situation, you as the bidder may or may not need a facility clearance. It's likely your employees will. But you can look at the contract documents, you can bid on it, and you can be awarded a contract with or without, depending on what the solicitation says. The harder one is a classified acquisition, and there is a whole world out there that's behind the curtain. And that is that the solicitation, the contract, and the work all are classified. And if you think of the work for maybe the intelligence agencies, or some of the work for DOD and some of the work for Homeland Security, and even some work for Department of Energy, you don't know about it if you're in the white world. And there's a catch-22 out there, because there are a lot of solicitations that say that you need to have a security clearance in order to bid on this, even though the law is that the mere fact that you're a bidder entitles you to apply for a security clearance. The problem that occurs is that the government will want you to have a security clearance and be operational on the day of an award, and it's simply not possible in the time allotted for considering a solicitation for that to happen. And as a result, a number of companies that otherwise might do a fine job and no doubt would be granted security clearances find that they're not. We've recently, for instance, had a client that won a series of wonderful contracts. It has a Canadian parent, however, and we'll talk about foreign ownership. As a result, despite a year of effort, they were not granted a security clearance or facility clearance, and they had to second all their people to another contractor so that they could continue to perform their work. Why don't we move on here? I'm briefly going to go over the subject of the law, and this is really a reference for you to look up in your leisure if you can't sleep. These are the bodies of law that really govern security clearances. Everything is set out primarily through executive order that date back a long time and have been evolving ever since. But you can see that the executive orders, really go back to 1961 to 1993. The most recent of which was the National Industrial Security Program, which sets out the body of rules that govern the handling of classified information. That program is implemented by the National Industrial Security Program Operations Manual, affectionately known as the NISPOM. In one of the subsequent pages, I give you a citation to where you get it. To those who are considering applying for a facility clearance, this becomes your Bible, and you need to print it off and keep a copy, and your FSO has to be conversant with all of the provisions that pertain. The industrial security regulations are another body of regulations that amplify on the requirements of maintaining a security clearance, and then their periodic updates and the like. The FAR in subpart 4.4 merely states that if you get a classified contract, you need to observe by the Department of Defense regulations that apply. And Jennifer, for some reason, I have lost my screen. Let me see if there we go. I've got it back. And then the Department of Energy and Homeland Security may have their own regulations. Let's turn now from the background to the next slide and start to look at the facility clearance process. As I said before, the key aspect is you need a requirement. And needing a requirement is as much or as great as you see a solicitation that you're interested in, and it says that there is a need at some point to have a security clearance. Or if you go to work for a company that has a contract, that's a need for a personal security clearance. In any case, you're going to need sponsorship of a government agency, a prime contractor, or a subcontractor who is willing to go to bat for you to say that you need a clearance. Prime contractors are sponsored by the government agency with whom they hold a contract. A subcontractor, in turn, is sponsored by the prime contractor for whom the sub will do some work. The entire process is administered by the Defense Security Service, which is located at the Marine Corps base south of Washington, and has branches throughout the country through their industrial service where they have local representatives. The initial processing and paperwork that you'll file, all of which you can find on the DSS website, or will be sent to you by the government or your prime contractor, is initially submitted to the DSS. And they make an initial determination about the quality of your business, your character, the integrity of your key personnel, management, board, president, those things. If you've been debarred, or if you've got a criminal background, or you've got a lot of judgments against you, you may not get through the first phase because they decide that you are not a person or company in whom they can have trust. It used to be that drug use was considered to be a no-no. The government now is much more concerned that you be honest about it and that it not be recent and ongoing. As I said, the application package, we're going to talk about it in a minute, what goes into it, but it's a hefty package, and you've got to do a fair amount of collecting of corporate documents for a personal security clearance. It used to be that you had to list every address that you ever lived at with a reference going back to your youth. Now they tend to go back 10 years, and similarly with all your jobs. It becomes somewhat arduous, and depending on the security clearance that you are seeking, it can take a long time because the government, in fact, goes and checks most of these references. It also, if you have a member of your family that is not a U.S. citizen, they will go and do an overseas check. You need to apply for a cage code. That is a number that is given to anybody who is going to have a security clearance. In addition, you will have already gone on to the SAM system, SAM, and obtained your DUNS number. That is a number by which all government contractors in the United States and overseas are tracked. That's also where you'll input your representations and certifications regarding your ethical, financial, and company information in a centralized location. The next thing you'll need to get is the NISPOM, which is this, it's about a 500-page loose-leaf document that gets republished every so often. It was published again in, I think, 2013 in part, and then over and above that, there are periodic updates and bulletins that your FSO will need to know on an ongoing basis to stay apprised of various changes. One of the components of getting a facility clearance is that your key personnel, and that's generally your senior executive and your facility security officer, are going to need personal security clearances. In terms of timing, the personal security clearance can take longer than the FCL. So as soon as one gets into the mode where you have a basis for qualification, you want to start the PSC process as quickly as possible. You'll need to go through fingerprint cards and fill out a SF-328, which is a certificate regarding foreign interests. I mentioned that the process for companies that have foreign interests is a little bit longer than for a domestic company. There's a whole series of inquiries about the nature and extent of the foreign interests, whether your employees work for foreign companies, whether you travel overseas, and the things like that. And the DSS will go through a fairly extensive review with the company before it allows for an FCL to be issued there. If there are certain foreign interests, we'll talk about what the mitigation and negation processes are. With that, why don't we turn to the next page. I talked a little bit about the DSS package, and in addition to that, once DSS approves you, and decides that you're of a nature that they can do business, you then begin to prepare for a visit by the industrial specialist who comes and visits your office. If you're going to have a hold type of clearance, examines what you set up in terms of being able to handle classified information. If it's just secret information, it may just be the need to have a GSA-approved safe. If you're going to have top secret information, you may need to have a SCIF, a secure compartmented facility, which requires a fair amount of construction and is intended to keep those on the outside from seeing or eavesdropping on you. But these are the kinds of documents that you're going to need. It's all of your corporate records, your tax number. If you file 10Ks, you need to list your key personnel, executive committee, board members, if you're an LLC, your managers, things like that. You're going to have to describe your primary business and services. You're going to have to collect emails and faxes and corporate information that goes back 10 years. And your FSO's got to be a U.S. citizen. In fact, your key person in the company as well will need to be a U.S. citizen, and your board will need to be U.S. citizen. If you're a foreign company, this kind of information is going to change because you'll need to either create some resolutions that exclude foreign personnel from anything having to do with government contracts, or you're going to have to adjust your board or board of directors or board of managers. The ISR visit, can take half a day. They do a great many of them. The folks who carry them out are not as sophisticated about the rules sometimes as the folks at headquarters at DSS, it may almost require a little bit of coaching. These folks do not have a lot of authority, and to the extent they have issues, they will raise them with headquarters, and that may delay the process a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. We come back to the NISPOM. This is a document that it sets out the minimum security requirements for a cleared contractor. It talks about ownership and the structure of your offices and how to transport information and what to do if there's a security breach, things like that. The ISR offers guidance on sort of the latest rules and changes. There may be a security breach that's been discovered and they want you to change the way you handle your IT. And so they'll publish a memorandum on it with regard to what steps you need to do. There may be certain restrictions on certain foreign nationals. We've talked a little bit about the storage and non-storage. And again, it's just an additional burden if you need to go through it. There are an awful lot of companies that, in fact, never need to have that hold aspect to their clearance. It doesn't necessarily shorten the process, but it takes a little bit off the nerves not having to worry about it. We get a lot of calls from FSOs who are concerned that they've discovered a breach and they'd like to keep their job, and they know they need or are supposed to report it to the DSS or the security official at their contracting agency. So it's the FSOs are a great many in number, and there are consultants out there who, while they cannot be a part-time FSO, because an FSO needs to be an employee of the company, they often can offer great guidance to a company that maybe has a part-time FSO while they're getting started. If you get into a contract that requires top secret or higher, the government may impose additional requirements on you. It can include additional reporting requirements, additional security requirements, posting of a guard at the front door, all that kind of additional work. And the investigations can be much more intense. At certain levels, a polygraph is required. It's all in all a more onerous process of getting briefed and debriefed and possibly being limited in one's overseas travel. Let's go on to the next page. Once you've gone through that process, and I might note that people often ask, you know, how long does this process take? And there is no particularly good answer. The folks at DSS live in a world of threats that most of us would not want to wish in our worst nightmares. And they think of the world in terms far different than we do, and they often see issues that we think are very minor. The government really needs you and wants you. The security clearance process can go through in a matter of weeks. I like to think that it might take 3 months to 6 months to get a security clearance. I have had them go on for over a year. So that, with a caveat that that involved foreign companies trying to negotiate their way to a security clearance. When the process ends, the Department of Defense sends you a security agreement, which we talked about earlier, which sets out your obligations to maintain the confidentiality of information, how you're going to do it, to report issues, to report anything you see. And that is something that's taken very seriously, and it is why the NISPOM is there, because that sets out the rules. You'll then have a kickoff meeting with your industrial services representative, who will remind you of all the rules and all of your obligations, and in all likelihood will set out a date in the future, 6 months to a year, to have an initial review to see that you are living up to all of your obligations. And one of the things that is very much part and parcel of a security clearance at the facility level is that, in fact, you will undergo ongoing and continuous review and occasional spot checks by the government. Let's turn to the next page. So I expect that most of you are involved in companies that are domestic or going to be involved. I will only then spend a little bit of time, because it's surprising how many companies from overseas seek to do business with the U.S. government and would like to gain access to classified information. The fact is that classified information is made available only to U.S. citizens, not to people who hold green cards or anything else. Similarly, if a company is owned, controlled, or influenced by a foreign entity, it may not have access to classified information, and so it is necessary for a foreign entity, either one seeking to do business directly with the United States or one that is seeking to set up a U.S. operation, or third, one seeking to acquire a U.S. operation. All of them have to go through some plan either to mitigate or to negate the ownership, control, and influence. Ownership is obvious. You own some shares or an interest in a company. Control is that you hold some management position or some other way of controlling a company. It can be through debt. It could be through contract. It could be through some kind of shared management. And lastly, influence. If a company owes a lot of money to a foreign entity, if a company does business, i.e. a domestic company does business overseas, and the CEO of the domestic company sits on a foreign board, that could be kind of influence. And the way it's sussed out is everybody fills out a SF-328, which has some 20 questions that probe here and there about your foreign interests. Assuming that there is some foreign interest, you have to come up with what's called an action plan, which will negate or mitigate the FOCI. If the foreign interest is low, less than 5%, and you can't put anybody on the board, you can probably get away with just passing a board resolution. As you move up the level of interest by the foreign entity, you have to do something with the governance of the corporation. And voting trusts and proxy boards, basically the foreign entity becomes a passive investor and turns the running of the company over to a U.S. board of directors. Under the last two security control agreements and special security agreements, the foreign company gets to maintain management control of the company, but you set up a special committee of the board comprised of U.S. citizens who work with the senior executive in the FSO to handle all matters that pertain to classified information. There's some additional restrictions on those companies. They're not allowed access to top secret information without an additional determination by the government that it's in the interests of national security. Some of the other burdens are you have to come up with a technology control plan, affiliated services, and communications plans. These basically probe into your IT network and how you communicate with the world, what other services you might be performing outside the scope of the government contract with classified information, and then how your electronics are set up. Although the DSS has now provided model agreements for each of these, I assure you that if you need to go down this route, it is an expensive and time-consuming process that then continues with the expense of outside directors and periodic monitoring. That is, and if you have that, that is the kind of area where the assistance of outside counsel, which will involve corporate counsel, and those of us who also specialize in clearance matters, becomes invaluable. We've had a number of clients who have spent a year or more getting through the process at considerable expense. Let's turn to the next page. Once everybody gets through the process, and we hope they all do, that's really the beginning of an ongoing relationship with the Defense Security Service. The point person, as I keep emphasizing, is the FSO. That is the person responsible for compliance, and it involves training, back-checking, and developing a compliance program. The penalties for an FSO who does not do his or her job can be substantial. The initial one being you lose your right to be an FSO, which can be a nice livelihood. The ISR will do annual and sometimes more frequent house visits to see that you are complying with the rules. You can't use the fact that you have a security clearance in your advertising. The fact is that people who are cleared and companies that do are able to bid on projects where a security clearance is required, and you can make known to interested parties that you have that. One thing to keep in mind about the difference between an FSL and a personal security FCL and a personal security clearance is the FCL will last indefinitely so long as you have a need to know. And so the situation that comes up is that you have a facility clearance and you lose your contract. Within 30 days, the DSS may cancel your facility clearance. And that has the impact that you, at the moment, cannot bid on a contract that requires it. And two, you have to find another home for your personnel who are cleared so that they can do work for you. It's a bit arduous, but it's something continues. For personal clearances, the clearance is initially good for about 5 years. It gets re-upped every 5 years and generally goes into sort of an inactive state if you leave the company or your government, and will lay dormant for 2 to 3 years after you leave. If you have a need, re-upping the security clearance in that time frame is fairly simple. After that period, you've got to go through the process again. And as I said, the consequences of breach are significant. If you think that you're dealing with what the government may consider national security issues, and you see the extent to which they've gone against FCL, and you see the papers here in Washington with the severity they treat those who keep secrets, you'll notice somebody has their microphone on, and we're getting a lot of interference. Let's turn the page. Great. Export controls. I wanted to touch on 2 analogous areas. Security clearances pertain to people who have access to classified information. The United States also restricts the export of information that is restricted for national security or dual-use purposes. The Department of State maintains regulations under the International Trade in Arms Regulations. Those deal mostly with Department of Defense, technology, and goods. The Department of Commerce maintains controls under the Export Administration Regulations that restricts the ability to export certain kinds of dual-use items. We think of satellites and electronics and things like that. There is a licensing process that one must go through to export information. The key thing to keep in mind there is export occurs not just by transferring borders, but by speaking or showing to a person who's not a U.S. citizen or a green card holder who is okay, information that is otherwise controlled. The Foreign Asset Control program is administered by the Department of Treasury, and it limits the amount of business or restricts the right to do business with certain companies and entities that are deemed to be terrorist organizations or otherwise in violation of other programs we have. The export controls and the classified information programs often go hand in hand together, and they have a series of penalties if they're violated. The last one is, if you're in this area, is the number of overseas companies coming into the United States that are seeking to acquire domestic companies has increased greatly over the last 20 years. And the President has the right in any instance where it is deemed that the foreign acquisition of a U.S. company would not be in the interest of the United States to set aside that transaction entirely. The way that one can get around it is that one can voluntarily disclose the proposed transaction to CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and go through about a 150-day process of disclosing the transaction, which, if approved, means the President of the United States no longer has the right to set aside the acquisition, assuming you've been correct in your disclosures. If you don't go through the process, and I emphasize that it's voluntary, the President of the United States always has the right to undo or unwind the transaction that has occurred. Let's move on to what we hope is the conclusion here. I think the important takeaways are that it's a valuable asset. It requires planning and a good bit of effort that will be required to get a facility clearance, and it requires continued vigilance. The 2 enforcement mechanisms that the government uses are a little bit different. For the personal security clearances, there are any number of causes by which the government can decide to suspend or revoke a security clearance, which is deemed to be a privilege, not a right. If it is taken away from you, there is an administrative process that one can go through to have it reviewed at 2 levels. That is a specialized administrative process that one can go through. It is a standard that's stacked against the individual, but nonetheless one that results in the restoration of security clearances in some instances. For facility clearances, there's an internal review process that one can go through, but when one loses a facility clearance, it's usually for some significant breach, and the consequences necessarily are a little bit more onerous. And with that, if we turn to the next page, I thank you very much for attending. I hope it's been useful, and if there are any questions that I can answer, I would be glad to do so.
Great, thanks, Tony. It looks like we have a couple questions coming in here, and I'll read some of these off now. How long does the actual process take to obtain the clearance?
All right. I touched on that a little bit a while ago. A facility clearance in theory could go through in 3 to 6 months. If the government really wants you and you've got critical technology or critical services, it can go through faster. And I would say that that could go through in a matter of weeks. If something goes wrong in the process, it's incumbent on you to fix it promptly. If the government comes back to you with a question, you need to be responding to it in a day or two, or what the DSS or the ISR may do is drop you to the bottom of the pile, and that will add weeks or months to the process. The FOCI process with foreign companies generally drags out a good bit longer.
Okay, great. Do you need consultants or attorneys for this process? Are they required?
I also touched on this earlier. If you are a domestic company and you're pretty savvy about bureaucracy, the NISPOM and the DSS webpage will offer you the guidance for the process you'll need to go through. Where you need a consultant or an attorney who's familiar is sometimes they can speed the process along, and if there are issues, they can offer you guidance in how to solve those issues. If you're a foreign company trying to set up in the U.S. or you're going to go through the CFIUS process, those are pretty specialized issues, and we would recommend them.
Okay. And I'm going to just remind everybody that this presentation is being recorded, and we will email out the slides and the recording probably within the next day or two. We're still taking questions. I'm just going to move on to the contact information. So if you have something specific, you can reach out to us. So another question here reads, Tony, can you talk about specific penalties and violations regarding clearances?
Yeah. The penalties, for the most part, are of 2 kinds. There's the civil sanction, which is you lose your clearance. Most other penalties in this realm involving classified information are on the criminal side, and the government goes over to that side fairly easily. The unauthorized release of classified information is a criminal offense and is easily prosecuted, so it's fine and potential jail time. And on the civil side, as I said, the biggest sanction they have is they take away your clearance. And of course, in the application process, you're under the dictates of 18 U.S. Code, Section 1001, which is the false statements clause. If you make a false statement to get a security clearance, in addition to everything else, I've forgotten the jail time and penalties, but they're pretty stiff.
The next question reads, we have a secret facility clearance without storage and would like to upgrade to a top secret facility clearance. Hang on one second, I just lost part of it. We would like to upgrade to a top secret facility clearance without storage. What additional requirements must we meet?
Whatever your ISR is going to require, one, and two, you need a top secret clearance. A top secret need. So you'll need a contract that requires you to have access to top secret information. As I said earlier, everybody would like to have maybe a top secret clearance, but you need to have it. And you will find that in the solicitation. I think what's called a DD 240 or 250 at the back of the solicitation will specify the security needs. If you are going to get a facility clearance at a top secret level, you will need at least one and probably two people to go through the full field investigation in order to have security clearances that match those of the company, and that is a matter of time going through that process. They take a while to get. But the process in the company is going to be the same person's going to come check, and if it doesn't have a hold requirement, it's merely briefing the people involved with doing the work on restrictions on transporting classified information. You can't bring it home on your laptop.
Any last, thoughts or questions that anyone else from the audience has? Go ahead and type them in. If everyone else can put their phones on mute, I think we're getting some background noise here. And Tony, any, last conclusions that you want to share with the audience?
No, I thank you very much for spending your time with us. I hope it's been informative. Feel free to email me questions or give me a call if I can be of assistance in this field. And all best luck in your contracting efforts.
One more question just came in before you sign off, Tony. Do you have to have a contract with a need for facility clearance before applying?
No, you have to have a contract with a need for access to classified information. And so in theory, no, the contract will never specify a facility clearance. It will simply specify on that form I mentioned that this contract will require access to, say, secret information. That sets off the trigger that you need to, one, begin the process for personal security clearance. You need to get an FSO. You need your senior executive to get a personal security clearance. And you need to begin the process of getting a facility clearance. You can, if you want, if you are a subcontractor, you could run your cleared personnel through your prime contractor and never get a facility clearance. You would simply place the security clearance in the hands of your prime contractor, and the prime contractor would sort of supervise your workers. That is financially an awkward situation because they're paying your employee and you're trying to get your profit out of the process. But in some instances, the government will not grant the facility clearance to a sub. But once you get the DD 250, you in theory can apply, and either your prime contractor or the government agency will become your sponsor in seeking the facility clearance, which authorizes you then to hold the personal security clearances of your employees.
Great. Well, thanks again to the attendees. Thanks to Tony Williams-Mullen. Thanks to Anna Ehrman at George Mason and the great group of folks over there at the PSAP. Anna, anything else you wanted to add there?
No, thank you both. Thank you, Jennifer and Tony, for the great information. If anybody has questions or if you don't receive a copy of the presentation, please let me know by email and we'll make sure that you get it. And if you have any other ideas for new classes, please let me know. Happy to add new material to this class today. So thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to stop the recording right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.